All right, guys, so we have some new numbers that are just coming out from a couple polling organizations. I'll walk you through it. 2 in 10 Americans say the U.S. is headed in the right direction. 2 in 10. 2 in 10. Okay, this may be the lowest number I've personally seen in all my time covering politics. So, in the New York Post here, they say fewer and fewer Americans are saying the United States is on the right track or that the economy is in good shape as inflation soars, according to a new poll. A recent survey done by the Associated Press NORC Center for Public Research found that just 21% of adults believe the U.S. is going in the right direction, down from 29% in April. Now, 29% is also an abysmal number. It's a horrific number. But we dropped even more, all the way down to 21. Even Democrats are losing hope, with only 33% saying the U.S. is headed in the right direction compared to 49% a month ago and 55% in March. So 33% for your own party saying this is, honestly, political apocalypse. It is political Armageddon, if you ask me. Americans were only slightly more optimistic about the economy, with a mere 22% describing it as very good, somewhat good, or leaning toward good. 22% describe it as some iteration of good, compared to 29% who said the same thing in April. The remaining 78% describe the economy as very poor, somewhat poor, or leaning toward poor. I can't overstate how terrible these numbers are, because usually in these sorts of polls, hyper-partisanship takes over. And the people who identify as Democrats to one extent or another, they, kind of fall in line to protect their guy, the president. That's simply not happening now. In fact, the opposite is happening. Like, everybody in the country is like, this is terrible, this is horrendous, we hate it, and you're doing a bad job. The survey was released days after President Biden admitted inflation is a real tough problem to solve and warned it could get worse before it gets better. So then you have some pictures here. Gas, $5.59. I don't know where this is. I'm going to guess that's in California. Biden. Making a very Biden face, if I don't say so myself. 2/3 of Americans, 67%, disapprove of Biden's handling of the economy, with 51% saying his policies have done more to hurt than help, and 18% saying the opposite, while 30% say the president's actions have made no difference at all. The poll also saw Biden's approval rating dip to 39% from 45% last month and 63% in early May of last year, the lowest percentage in the survey since the 46th president took office. So this is the lowest percentage from this particular polling organization. I do believe there has been numbers from other polling organizations that have had Biden lower than that. But guys, we're talking about like George W. Bush at the end of his time in office territory. We're talking about, in some polls, Joe Biden having a lower approval rating than Donald Trump at the most unpopular times of his presidency. So this is, again, I don't know how else to describe it, but political apocalypse. Somehow, every time we see a new poll on Joe Biden, it gets worse and worse and worse. Now, important thing to note here, the last time that Joe Biden's approval rating was high, it was like 52% or 54%, and it was in the wake of him cutting people $1,200 checks. Now, understand something. At the time, the Democrats were going around saying, we're going to give you $2,000 checks. So even the $1,200 or $1,400, whatever it was like sort of a Weasley. I think it was $1,400 because Trump had given $600, so they did some Weasley stuff where they were like, well, if you do the math on it, it works out to $2,000. So they cut the checks. And even though they sort of lied about the amount they were going to give, just the fact that people's lives were being materially improved, Biden had a very high approval rating at the time. And then ever since then, they've done less and less, and to the point where now they're basically doing nothing. And guess what? The public has massively turned on Biden. Biden's approval rating among Democrats has similarly slumped, dropping to 73% after hitting at least 82%. Though all of 2022, through all of 22, I think that's supposed to say, in the AP NORC survey. So, now again, for your own party, this is really low. Remember when Trump used to always brag, while he was president, he would randomly tweet out like, 95% approval rating among the Republican Party. Thank you. Now, sometimes you're not going to be surprised to learn Trump would lie about that number. Like, he would say it when the number was actually like 92% or 91%. But he still had about a 90% approval rating among his own base, whereas here with Biden, a 73% approval rating among Democrats. And again, this is at a time when we're hyper-partisan. It just shows, like, nobody's really supporting him, or very few people are supporting him. And for the people who do support him, it's very tepid. It's very like, yeah, I guess he's still better than the alternative type stuff. The poll also found that 38% support Biden's handling of immigration as border states brace for the lifting of the Trump-era Title 42 health policy, potentially paving the way for a surge in border crossings. So now, if I'm not mistaken, I think this Title 42 was struck down by a court. And so really they have no choice but to remove Title 42. I believe that is the pandemic-era policy, which says that if somebody crosses the border, because there's a pandemic and because there's a health crisis, they don't even get due process. You could just ship them out immediately. Now, Biden has been using that just as much, if not more, than Donald Trump used that. So when you have people on the right attacking Joe Biden for being soft on immigration or being for open borders or whatever, that's factually not true. In fact, Biden has ramped up deportations. Now, of course, people on the right, even though they agree with that, they would never give him credit. But Biden's sort of in no man's land because he does the thing that the right wants. The right doesn't give him credit. And if he does the thing that the right wants, then you're going to have lefties saying, we don't agree with what you're doing. So, voila, there you have it. 38% support of his handling of immigration. According to the survey, only 21% of Americans have a great deal of confidence in Biden's handling of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, while 39% said they only had some confidence in the president. Another 39% said they had hardly any confidence in Biden at all. So this is an area where at the beginning, Biden actually had high approval ratings with how he was dealing with Ukraine. Now, as you know, the crisis has dragged on, we've sent Lord knows how many weapons packages over there. 4, 5 different weapons packages, sent over $40 billion in weapons to Ukraine. Apparently, when you do that, as we also have a baby formula shortage, people really aren't too hot on how you're handling that crisis. A majority of Americans, 54%, also disapprove of Biden's handling of the U.S. relationship with Russia, while 45% approve. When broken down by party, the poll found that only 15% of Republicans approve of the president's performance on the issue compared to 73% of Democrats. And then they go on to say, you know, the AP NORC poll surveyed 1,172 adults. All right, so I have a number. All these numbers are devastating. I have one that I honestly think is more devastating. So take a look at this. In NPR NewsHour Marist poll, Biden approval among millennials and Gen Z is just 26%. 26% among a core demographic of Democratic voters who they need to win any election. They lean much more Democrat on generic 45 to 40, but that's still way below Democrats' recent 60+% performance with them. Biden's standing with younger voters has always been tenuous. Do Democrats have a strategy to respond? Allow me to answer that, Ronald Brownstein. No. They do not have a strategy to respond. Not in the slightest. And then I like this response here. This guy, Max Lubin, responded with this. This is from Data for Progress. According to a new poll by Data for Progress, bipartisan majority of younger likely voters support student loan cancellation for all student loan borrowers. 71% of voters aged 18 to 34 support wide-scale student loan cancellation. Gee, I wonder why Biden's numbers with young people are absolutely abysmal. I can't figure it out. Could it be because when he ran for president, he said a number of times, he gave different numbers, honestly. He was like, I'll eliminate $50,000 of student loan debt. I'll eliminate $10,000 of student loan debt. I think there was one time where he even hinted that he would get rid of all student loan debt. And now there were whispers in DC that he was going to do some form of student loan debt cancellation. And then articles came out a week later saying, actually, no, Biden's, quote, agonizing over the decision. Agonizing over the decision? Why? This is like the easiest political layup of all time. It's the ethically and morally correct thing to do, and it's also good politics and good policy. I mean, the way the system is set up is effectively a neoliberal scam. Load students up with debt. They get a degree that marginally helps them to improve their job prospects. People start out life way behind the 8 ball. And he's agonizing over it because he's a creature of Washington. But, I mean, this is one of those things, it's such a political layup. It's one of those things where if he were to eliminate student loan debt, just sit back and watch your numbers tick up like maybe 10 percentage points. And you think that's something that maybe Biden and the Democrats need right now? Of course they need it. Look, at this point, I'm begging Joe Biden to do anything that would help Americans and help the Democrats' chances in the midterms. Anything. For the love of God, anything, Joe. If you just legalize marijuana through executive order and free all the nonviolent drug offenders, his approval rating would probably tick up maybe 5 percentage points if he does that. Not only is Biden not doing any of the right things, if he were to do one of the right things or some half measure of a right thing, I have no faith or support that they'll brag about that and campaign on that. Because Democrats simply don't know how to do politics. Their brains are melted from accepting the framing of the argument from the right for decades and decades and decades, where they're basically moderate Republicans now. So they accept the premises of people on the right who are arguing, they think they're arguing in good faith, and they end up following them down that track. So, for the love of God, legalize marijuana, free all the nonviolent drug offenders, eliminate student loan debt, and then after you do that, brag about it, call a press conference, show the polls how these are super popular issues, and say, I am delivering for the American people, even though I'm being obstructed by a party that wants to actively hurt Americans. That's what you have to do. For them to have any chance in the midterms, this is what he'd have to do. Or even when he does the random one-off decent things, like, for example, he just invoked the Defense Production Act to deal with the baby formula shortage. I haven't heard him talk about that or brag about that or, send out his staffers to go on the Sunday shows to explain how this president is taking action because he cares deeply about our babies. They just don't know what they're doing. It's like Biden's presidency is the nap-all-day presidency. Everybody views him as like this frail, old, tired man, and then he goes ahead and acts in a way that coincides with that notion. Jesus, man. I mean, seriously, can you guys believe? I'm sure you can believe it, but just marinate in this reality for just a second about how devastating this is for Democrats in the upcoming election. 26% of millennials and Gen Z approve of Biden. If Democrats don't win young people, if Democrats don't get young people to vote, they literally have no prayer. None whatsoever. And what's even more astonishing is Roe versus Wade is about to be slapped down. This is something that in theory should help Democrats at the ballot box. But that might be overrode or overridden, however you say it, by inflation, by the economy, and by all these other problems. And that's a crazy political reality where you get this fundamental cornerstone of Democratic policy and the Democratic worldview is going to get destroyed. And that might not even help Democrats much at all because they're so bad on all the other issues that it becomes irrelevant. Look, Joe Biden is done, man. Joe Biden is done. What I take away from these two polls is that he would need a miracle. Not only would he need to do popular things, do it on his own through executive order, and then brag about it, even if he were to do that, it might be too little too late because the view of Joe Biden has ossified now. Everybody thinks of him as a tired, sad old man who doesn't do anything. And so, even if he does the right thing, and even if he does brag about it, yeah, he'd get that bump in his approval rating, but would it be enough to make the Democrats the political winner in the next election? Highly doubt it. Joe Biden is done. He needs a miracle, and honestly, probably a little bit more than a miracle. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.